And we're live. Welcome back to another episode of the Wheelie Podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Micah Toll, and I'm joined again by Lectric Seth Weintraub. How's it going over there, Seth?
I'm all right.
Awesome. And let's see, we have got a stack of interesting e-bikes, e-scooters, e-things to talk about this week. As usual, we've got several new unveilings, but some very interesting ones this time. We've got a crazy new e-bike from Juiced. We've got a low-cost new commuter e-bike from Lectric. VinFast, a Vietnamese company, is bringing their first e-bike to the US market. We've got a super affordable full suspension electric scooter from Yadea, just launched. I tossed an electric bicycle battery in a bathtub to see what would happen. And last but not least, we're going to check out a review of an electric rickshaw. So, where are we starting off this week, Seth?
All right. Juiced unveils new folding e-bike that may be the fastest and most powerful ever.
Yeah, this one I feel like is right up me and Seth's alley in terms of like
Sure.
what it offers us. The new Juiced JetCurrent Pro is their like super high power, high performance folding e-bike. So it fits in that class of 20-inch fat tire folder like we see all over the place, like Lectric XP, Rad Expand, that kind of thing. But it does it with just so much more performance. So it's like, if Juiced Bikes built a folding e-bike, this is what they would do, and they finally did it. Tora Harris, the founder and CEO, said he's been working on getting a folding bike out there for like 15 years, which is about how long the company's been around. And this is true to form for the company. It's got a massive battery, 1 kilowatt hour. It's got a massive motor, 2,000 watts peak, and it's just got some crazy performance, good parts, quality suspension fork, four piston, I believe, hydraulic disc brakes, turn signals, lights, mirror. Like this is basically, for all intents and purposes, a light motorcycle packed into the body of a fat tire folding e-bike. I think it even gets up to something like 34, 35 miles an hour, something like that, unrestricted. Now, of course, you can't do that on public roads, or theoretically, you're not supposed to do that on public roads. But they have the track mode if you unlock it fully for riding off road that you can get into the low 30s. So, I mean, I don't even know what to call this thing, Seth. Like, is it even an electric bike anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a folding moped, really, especially with that top speed. I did note the top speed. Like, I feel like you have to be pedaling to get to the absolute top speed, and they top out the throttle only at like 30 miles per hour or something. Not sure
Yeah,
why that.
exactly. Yeah, it does seem strange. I mean, I guess they've got a big chain ring on there so that theoretically you can pedal up to like 34 or 35, or at least help it at 34 or 35. But yeah, it is a bit odd that they would restrict that last little bit. Like if you're going to give us, 30, 31 on the throttle, why not just go
Right.
completely nuts?
Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting situation. I'm curious. Like, I see the spoked wheels in the back. Juice has kind of gone back and forth from the mag to the spokes. Is this the same motor with like maybe a slightly better controller than the last generation of hyper stuff? Those topped out at about 1.8 kilowatts. I'm just wondering if they, got that extra zero point 0.2 kilowatts out of the same motor and a better controller.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think they called that other one the Retro Blade,
Retro,
partly because of that mag design you were talking about, and because it doesn't have that same shell. I wonder if they also changed the internals. Like it's actually a different 2,000 watt peak motor. But those motors are sometimes kind of black boxes to us because it's hard to know exactly what's going on inside. Did they
right.
change the phase wires? Did they change the magnets? Some of this is kind of a mystery to us.
Yeah, it can all be subtle, or maybe they just, figured out a way to keep it cool at a higher amperage. Lot of options here. So some things I note about this thing. One is, yes, it's foldable, so you can theoretically put it in the back of a car easily, but it is like close to 100 pounds. So that's it's a deadlift really at that point. So 92.6 pounds, which that's on the high end. You're not gonna get this for a senior citizen who wants to take their bike down to Delray Beach and zoom around. This is more like a, heavy duty kind of situation. Um, talk to me a little bit about like the components on here. Like we talked about the shocks a little bit. What kind of derailleur? What are we thinking here?
Yeah, so it looks like the pedal drivetrain is pretty basic. I think it's just a standard Shimano, probably like a Tourney or an Altus. I'm not
Okay.
100% sure there. They invested a little more in some of the other parts because I think they figured not very many people are going to be pedaling that often. So,
Right.
for example, the front dropouts, if you look at that beefy fork, they're actually locking through axle dropouts. So, much stronger than your typical like quick release skewer.
Hmm.
Four piston hydraulic disc brakes. Let's see what else. It basically seems to have like motorcycle style, not just brakes, but brake levers, which you got that like ball end kind of thing there. And if
Yeah.
anything, the inclusion of the turn signals, the inclusion of the mirror, that kind of stuff, I think sort of positions what they're trying to do with this bike. They're saying like, listen, this is like a road going vehicle at this
Right.
point.
Yeah. This is kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is the bike you want to be on 35-mile-per-hour roads with, and you're going to be want to ride with the cars instead of having the cars having to swoop around you. Um,
Yeah. And
yeah.
like when you just, sorry, go on.
No, I'm getting the cut of their jibe there. Uh,
Yeah,
with what
I
I
mean, when you described it as like a folding moped, I think that's probably the best way to say it because if you even compare it to like, those like 1970s, 80s mopeds, it really looks a lot like it. The proportions, even like that battery looks like the like drop
fuel
tank
tank.
that they would have. Yeah. So, I mean, like those old like how do you say it? The puke, like the PUCH or
That was
however
it. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And then
those style, like it really looks like those mopeds.
yeah, and so a little bit of a departure from Juice. It has more of a typical bike seat, but that's probably so that they can have the rack on the back. Do we have a spec on the like how much you can put on that rack? Is it girlfriend approved or what's the weight?
That's a good question. I don't know if I saw that. Now that you mention it, they might have published that, and I just don't recall. A
Mhm.
lot of these, they sort of, unless they're like a welded part of the frame, and a lot of them have a much lower rating, like 50, 60 pounds. But I see people sitting on these all the time, so they'll probably tell you you're not supposed to use it that way. But I wouldn't be surprised if a chunky looking frame like that could support a medium sized person.
Yep.
But
All
again, we
right.
don't condone it.
Nope, we don't condone anything that's not 100% legal, obviously. So when can I get my hands on one of these? Where, when, how?
Yeah, so it's looking like June is the estimated delivery date. So, probably start shipping out the very end of May, early June. The price a bit high at $2,799, but again, like you're basically paying for motorcycle performance here, right? Like you're not comparing this to a typical class 2 or class 3 electric bike. So in that case, you're comparing it to kind of like the onyxes and stuff like that, which is a whole nother story that we're looking into as
Yeah.
well. But yeah, it's really out of the normal bike classes. So that 2799, I think you're more comparing that to light mopeds.
Yeah, I mean, this, we talked when earlier about how this is kind of something like you would almost expect to see from a company like Luna. This is kind of, at that $2,700 price point, it's kind of starting to compete with the Talaria Triple X or Surrons. People who are thinking like, I want to go fast, I want to spend $3,000. I want to, these kind of questions. This is putting that in there. However, this is going to look a lot more like the bikes that the mild mannered 750-watt bikes that you see everywhere. The Rads and the drop ships from China and all that other stuff. So I can see a big market for something like this, especially with the I don't want to say the novelty of the folding, but because that's a real um, kind of a game changer. But in terms of who is this bike for, these are the people who are pushing far beyond the class one, two, three, and they're riding on streets, and they are they're looking to ride with traffic instead of having traffic try to get around them. I love
Yeah.
it. I hate that most things done on this thing are probably going to be illegal. Wish there were some updates to laws, but you know it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it's cool to see that it exists. Just use it wisely.
Yes, and carefully. All right, let's move on here. Next up is Lectric XPress e-bike, launched as a $9.99 torque sensor commuter electric bike.
Yeah, this one caught me off guard when I first heard that this was coming because Lectric is known for their XP 3.0. I mean, they have many bikes, but the XP 3.0 is like their main seller, and it's a 20-inch folding fat tire bike. So they don't really have, other than the XP Lite, they don't really have any narrow tire bikes until now. The Express is that metro style, large wheeled full size commuter bike. It's got 27 and a half inch wheels. I think they're 2.1-inch tires, if I'm not mistaken. So, fairly narrow urban style tires. But then it brings in all of what we sort of like know and love from Lectric. It keeps the price low, $999, but it gives us good power, good battery options. In fact, two of each. You can choose from either 500 or 750 watt motor. And you've got two battery options of 10.4 and 14 amp hours. So that's something like 500 and 670-ish watt hours, if I'm not mistaken. Which I think, oh, and the price, by the way, I think it bumps up $300. Yeah,
Right.
$300 for the higher power motor and the higher capacity battery. However, something that's kind of neat during this pre-launch or the pre-sale during the launch here, if you get the higher power, larger battery version, they give you a second higher capacity battery free. So you get two batteries for the extra $300 plus the stronger motor. So if you don't mind the little bit more weight and the little bit more power, like it just seems like the way to go with that higher power one. But other than that, we've still got good parts on here. We've got hydraulic brakes, we've got included lights, and interestingly, we actually have a torque sensor, which is kind of mind-blowing at this price point. Like there's just not very many $1,000 e-bikes that have an actual torque sensor to give that nicer, more responsive feeling pedal assist. And so there's a lot of pretty good parts on this bike. Nothing here is top shelf outside of the Lectric One. Lectric doesn't really make high-end bikes. They make, decent, affordable e-bikes. And so everything here is decent or slightly above decent. One thing that I wish they would have included as part of the bike are that rack and fender set. Those are actually add-ons. I think it's like $100 to get both of those together. Which that's how these e-bike companies pad their profits, is they hold back a few things as accessories, which is pretty common in the industry. It's a little unfortunate for us as riders because we'd like to just know what the price is for everything. I think most people want a rack and a lot of people want fenders unless you just don't have any rain. But all told, I think it's a really interesting bike at a great price point. And if anything, to me, it kind of feels like a more premium version of the Rad mission from a few years ago that we saw
Yeah,
from Rad. And so
that
that's I think cool to me.
yeah, you and me are on the exact same page. That was like my initial impression when I saw this. Was I was like, this should have been the Rad mission too. Like this is all the upgrades to the Rad mission, same price. The drop through option, or the step through option. A lot of things that people would have complained about the Rad mission, this thing delivers on. I don't remember if the Rad mission had hydraulic brakes, but I do know that it was class 2, and I know that this being class 3 is going to bring a lot more people to the party, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the longest time, Rad was like class 2 is all we do. And
Right.
so many people wanted more than that. On their new bikes, they finally went class 3. But yeah, you're exactly right. Like this is, I think, what a lot of people would have wanted on the Rad mission, which was already a great bike. I mean,
Yep.
I have one, I love it, but like if you could have just pushed it further and like just checked off a few more things on a wish list, I think most people would have basically built this in their mind.
Yeah, and I wonder how Lectric does this and Rad can't do this. Like, Rad clearly made the decision that the Rad mission was not worth continuing to invest in, and they went in different directions and made more premium bikes. But like, why does Lectric get to do all these updates and still sell it for 999 when Rad was there first? They have the supply chain. Why isn't this a Rad bike?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that Electric has a few advantages, some that they've designed in and some that got kind of lucky. For one, they've got such buying power now, that I think they're selling probably more bikes than Rad, perhaps
Yep.
significantly more. And I think that their buying power means that they can force these suppliers to bring some of these prices down. Secondly, they're doing this at a time when there's like an overstock of components, whereas Rad was doing it like right before or perhaps right during COVID. I think it was it 2020 when the Rad mission came out. So I think it was right as COVID was, like picking up. So very different climates they were launched in, which I wonder if that, adds to the equation here, that there was, sort of a lack of available parts when Rad did this, and now Lectric's coming in when there's just like a pile of overstock components from every supplier.
Right. Yeah, I think that's spot on. Um, it's just kind of a shame because Rad is going in directions that we don't always understand, and it feels like Lectric is kind of doing the things that we kind of like. This makes sense. This makes sense. Wow, how did they get the price down to that? That these are very compelling bikes. Um, and uh, I guess the proof is in the pudding. When are we going to see our first review on this one?
Yeah, so I think these are, I want to say mid-summer these are supposed to come out.
Okay,
I'm hopefully headed to Phoenix in a few weeks though, and I think they have some pre-production ones there that I'm going
cool.
to try and throw a leg over. But the actual production units, I think, are mid-ish summer.
Okay. Uh, I hope they make a lot of them because I think it's going to be quite popular.
Yeah, yeah. The one thing I would have requested would have been colors. They only have black and white, so like some colors would have been nice, but they've
Yeah, I think they're probably like testing the waters with the easy colors, the colors that nobody can hate, and
yeah,
then maybe further down the line they'll go juiced and do a fire and orange or whatever, those kind of things.
yeah.
All right, moving on. VinFast, a company we hear a lot about on the car side, launches a fast new e-bike in the US to combine American and Vietnamese culture.
Yeah, this one it's interesting, but it's a bit of a head scratcher to me. So this is their new VF Dragonfly from VinFast, and the way they're pitching this in the US is that combination of Vietnamese and American culture. So they say it's designed after like the cultural dragon symbolism, and they use these different frame tubes. It's a little hard to see in any of their press pictures, but they're actually kind of like rectangular frame tubes. And so they describe the design as somehow being dragon inspired, but if you ask me, it just kind of looks like a Super 73 clone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, I kind of wanted to blurt that out. I was like, that looks like a Super 73Z, whatever, like
yeah.
that looks exact. I mean, even the decals kind of look like it, and the, battery placement under the thing. And, I'm just like biting my tongue. Like, what I definitely see the American influence there. I don't know if I don't know what makes this partially Vietnamese is, I guess, the question.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, I'm trying to understand where exactly they're drawing on this quote unquote like cultural combination. I imagine it's produced in their Vietnamese factories, so like it certainly has Vietnamese DNA, and of course, VinFast is a large Vietnamese electric vehicle company. But to me, it looks like they just went full America here, which is fine, I guess, because it's designed for the American market. But um, unless you're not a Super 73 style fan, which not everybody is. But yeah, to me, this just looks like a straight up Super 73. almost like a clone, even like you were saying. It doesn't even look like some of these inspired bikes. It really looks like kind of copy paste.
If I saw this on the road, I would be like, "There goes a Super 73." I wouldn't even bat an eye. Like, I know there's some differences. It looks like it may be a little bit longer. Like there's some more, I don't know, maybe the light's not the same size. It looks a little smaller. Um, there's subtle differences, but like there's no question where this was inspired from. And, even the decals kind of, uh, you know, tip
They have
their,
those vibes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But it is interesting because Vietnam obviously is a big moped, you know, light electric vehicle culture. So maybe we need to kind of drill down and like figure out, what are the subtle differences. Maybe it's the motor or whatever. I don't know. But
Yeah. And in fact, Vietnam is actually becoming a much bigger player in the e-bike manufacturing space, which I didn't know as much about until this past week. I spent the whole week in China, and several factories I visited were talking about opening Vietnamese sort of like satellite factories, partly to get around the tariffs, but also, I mean, I think it's another source of like cost effective overseas manufacturing, and it seems like they're sort of becoming the next China of e-bikes, not to that scale, but certainly another source.
right, yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the tariffs. I think also, if you want to have a company that has a stable, we don't, if China and the US go to some kind of, Cold War, we don't want to be stranded there and, zero China products coming out. You definitely want to spread out your supply chain a little bit. So Vietnam is definitely one of the places that'll get looked at for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so perhaps VinFast here is a bit ahead of the curve.
Yep. So they started there. All right. Moving on. I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Yadea Artist launched as an impressive 499 full suspension electric scooter.
Yeah, so you get super close, closer than I would have gotten if I hadn't have been informed. It's apparently Yadea is the
Okay.
correct English pronunciation, and apparently in Chinese it's Yadi. But this is their new consumer standing kick scooter. And the cool thing about this one, well, there's several cool things. But one of the coolest things about it is that it's full suspension at an incredible price. It's just $499. And so you rarely ever see full suspension scooters at that price. If anything, a lot of the $500 scooters are zero suspension or they have like a dinky spring fork. And so this one actually has swing arm suspension on both the front and the rear. So I had a chance to test this out a few days ago when I was at one of Yadi's factories in China, and this thing just rides so nice. Like I'm more of a bike guy, but I mean, this thing was just super comfortable. It weighs like 40 pounds, so it's really easy to flick around under you. And it's just like a sort of a pleasure to ride for a small full suspension electric scooter. It feels like you're on a much more bigger, much bigger, much more agile scooter. Now it's like 600 watts, so it's decently powerful. It's not crazy, but for $499, I think this thing is going to be hard to beat. They do have two larger electric scooters in the lineup. They all have the same style, dual swing arm suspension with that elastomer suspension instead of springs. But to me, the smallest one was really nice just because it was so easy to move around, easy to carry. And the one other cool little thing about this one that I really like is that it has a half twist throttle instead of a thumb throttle. I know thumb throttles are like 98% of the throttles in the scooter world. For some reason, they've all coalesced around the thumb throttle. But if you come from any larger two wheelers like bikes, scooters, mopeds, motorcycles, twist is kind of where it's at, or half twist on most e-bikes. So really cool to see that here. But I think, yeah, this is just like an awesome, really affordable sort of like student or commuter scooter. The one area I wish I could see improved was that it's only 15 miles an hour. So
Really?
that's a big bummer. Yeah. I mean, it's
It was
small,
super.
lightweight, but that's one area where they save a bit, I guess, is by limiting the high speed. Probably it means they don't have to have as big of a battery. I think it's like
Right.
350 watt hours. But like I said, they have two other scooters that go faster and have more power. So if you want that speed, you can upgrade to one of the other two. But if you want like super lightweight while still having good suspension, the Yadea Artist scooter here, $500, it'll do you right.
Yeah, so definitely looks appealing. How do they get this in front of people? Like, what is their, is this going to be at Best Buy? Or are they going to sell them to schools? Or are they going to sell them to fleets?
It
How do they
seems
get these?
Yeah, so it seems they have two sales channels. One is actually on Amazon, but then they sell directly from their website, and they have like a warehouse in the U.S. to ship these things out directly. So I usually recommend to people, if Amazon's an option, to go that way because they just make it so much easier. I mean, Amazon has some of its own issues in a number of ways, but for the consumer, like being able to return it and stuff like that is so easy. But they also do have their own website, and sometimes these companies actually have better deals on their website because I think they prefer you buy directly from them. So it might be worth checking out.
Yeah, but Amazon also has a policy where you can't sell it cheaper anywhere, even though they take a huge cut. So sometimes they'll have like these deals where you have a coupon code that'll drop it below. But anyway,
Oh,
there's
is that why they do that? I often see,
yeah,
yeah.
sometimes I think.
They're
Anyway,
gaming the system.
yeah, gaming the system. But it just seems like this is a very compelling product, but like there's the scooter space is so noisy. Like how do you get out in front of people? How do you like, what is the key to like making sure that people are considering this one when making a scooter purchase?
Yeah, for sure. I think that like the main differentiator here is that front suspension. A lot of scooters have rear suspension. Sometimes it's all right, sometimes it's not. But this one, it just works so well, and it's got a lot more travel and is quieter than your typical spring, scooter fork. So to me, it's so much nicer to ride, and it just looks kind of cool as well. I don't know, that like front swing arm scooter suspension is just kind of neat looking to me. So as someone who's tried it, I definitely recommend this thing just for the price. Everything else in this price category just seems like kind of cheap by comparison.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on. Oh, you used the kid term. I yeeted an electric bicycle battery into a tub of water to see what happens. I guess you were kind of bored this week, huh?
So to be fair, I did this before this week. It's been a
Okay.
busy week, but
Right.
yeah. So this is the Velotric Discover 2's battery. This e-bike was launched right at the end of last month, and while it's got a lot of cool things about it, one of the most interesting is that the battery is IPX7 rated, and the 7 means that it can be submerged up to 1 meter, a little over 3 feet, for I think 30 minutes, which it seems strange for the battery of an e-bike. Like it just feels wrong putting that underwater. But like, I got to do it for science, right? Like if they say you can do it. So that's what I did. I took the battery. Like at first I finished all the testing of the bike just in case, because I was like 50% sure this was not going to power up when I took it out.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, I filled a tub of water. I figured that the local HOA would not like it if I threw a battery in the neighborhood pool. So I used a
Right.
tub of water to be the proxy, drop that sucker in there, and I'll be damned if it didn't come out and start the bike right up. Like it was pretty wild. Now, to be
Interesting.
fair, technically the bike didn't start right up. I turned it on and it booted up and then immediately shut off. And then I
Huh.
was like, uh oh. And then so I did it again and it booted up for like a second and then shut off. And now I'm like, uh oh. And the old adage, like it's an idiot who does the same thing again and again and expects
Right.
different results. So I tried it for a third time, but this time it started up and it was just fine. So I think what happened was the electrical connector was still full of water and it was like actively shorting across the terminals until it, for a few seconds until all the water kind of drained out of the bottom of the battery, or at least where the electrical connectors are. So that third time it started up and then it's been fine ever since. So and then I asked the company, and they were like, "Yeah, you should like dry the battery before you just stick it back in the bike."
That makes
So
sense actually in hindsight.
yeah, so I guess I got excited and I kind of skipped that step. But yeah, I mean, as far as e-bike safety, like very few people are gonna, like ride their bike through a swimming pool. So I don't think it needs to be necessarily submergible, but the fact that it is just means that you really don't have to worry when it's raining or you ride through puddles, or you can even pressure wash it. Like a lot of companies will say in the fine print, like, do not use a pressure washer on your e-bike, like you'll mess things up. But Velotric is like, yeah, pressure wash the heck out of that thing. Like, go for it. So, it just speaks to like how wet and how aggressively wet you can get it and not have a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the build of this battery is kind of setting the standard for what e-bikes should be across the board. Like this should be, maybe not tomorrow, but like in a couple years, this should be just the standard. This is, you know, every e-bike battery, just like, every iPhone right now, you can drop in water and expect it to, survive. This is kind of the same thing. I think this is where the industry is going, and this should be kind of like the minimum expectation in a few years.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And you
and then,
remember when we were sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, and I think you're probably thinking the same thing when we were talking to Luke
Yeah.
about, yeah, man, we're on the same page today. But yeah, I agree. Like he mentioned the fact that the salt water, it wasn't even like droplets. It was like the mist of the salt water getting inside the batteries is what was causing these explosions in New York and everywhere. And because they salt the roads and cars are driving through the salt water, and it's bringing up a mist, and that mist is kind of getting in and slowly corroding the batteries. This kind of kills that. Uh, you know, I guess not
Nips it in the
100%.
bud.
Yeah, nips it in the bud. It certainly makes it a lot less likely to happen, which is great, and we should all aspire to have something like this.
To
So
throw our batteries at the tub.
yeah, and what kind of water is that? It looks very blue.
Yeah, so I put food coloring in it
Okay,
because like first I just filled it up and like you almost couldn't tell there was water in there because it's a
right.
clear tub. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
like for the effect, I figured like it would just look better if it was blue.
Yep. I think you're right.
It worked.
Nice
Yeah.
work. I'm glad you didn't explode.
Yeah, I was a little worried there. Also, by the second time it didn't turn on, I was getting a lot more worried.
Yeah, yeah. So dry off your batteries before. That's the lesson for today. All right, last story today. 630 electric rickshaw review. This fun e-bike can carry an entire family. Mike, I think
Yeah.
you let yourself go a little bit in this one.
So this is my brother-in-law.
Oh,
I,
sorry,
I'm
sorry.
I'm filming. Yeah. So
Hopefully he is not listening to this.
no,
Sorry.
he's good. Yeah, so this is an electric rickshaw. So that's basically an electric tricycle, but on the back, instead of where you'd usually have like kind of a dinky basket, you've now got a big bench seat. So big enough that you can fit, like I did, a pile of neighborhood kids on the back. You can get two adults. So I had my sister and her neighbor back there. I think at one point, so here you can see like we've got kids sitting on two adults' laps. I think we had six, maybe seven people on there total at one point. So, ideally probably meant for three people, two on the bench, one pedaling, but you can absolutely fit a lot of people on this bike, which is really the cool part of it to me, is that this is designed for serious hauling. They rated at 500 pounds of capacity. I have a slight issue with that I'll mention, but in general, it does seem like, it can support a lot of weight in terms of, like wiggling, moving people and children. The other thing is that just as a bike, as an e-bike, like forget about the fact that you can carry people. It's got some great performance. Like it goes 20 miles an hour, which very few electric trikes do. Most of the time they cut you off at like 14 or 15. So, great to see that they give us full class two speed there. 750 watt motor, peaks at like 1100 watts. So, good performance, good power, which you're going to need for something that carries a lot of weight. Full LED lighting, vendors. It even has a storage compartment under the bench so that you can, put things in there. If you're going to the park with the kids, you can put like water bottles, sports equipment, that kind of stuff. Big battery. It's 1,000 watt hours. So I think 48, 21 amp hours. And And yeah, so like all of the e-bike components are pretty darn good. Lots of power, lots of performance. The one thing that just like really gets me though is that they included mechanical disc brakes on here. There are
Oh,
3 of them, but yeah, for like a bike designed to theoretically carry 500 pounds, you would think that they would go with hydraulic brakes because, over time when you're braking hard, you're stretching that
yeah.
cable, and that's a lot of maintenance for like a heavy bike, especially with 3 brakes. And again, maybe that's why they did it, because you'd have to have some interesting plumbing for like combined rear brakes if you get 3 hydraulic brakes. But yeah, it just seems like, everything else is so nice, like, and then you've got the mechanical brakes, which I should say I never felt like it didn't have enough braking power. It does have a parking brake here, which is nice, but I never felt like, I pulled on the brakes when I had people on there and it wasn't stopping fast enough. It was fine, but it's, months from now, after all that braking, that the cables are stretching. That's what I'm, wondering about. So I would love to see, hydraulics. You could even do like a pretty easy front brake hydraulic upgrade. Just swap it yourself.
I was just gonna say that that would be probably my first thing there. So my other thing is like I think we had a freeze frame earlier where you had like 16 kids in the back. I noticed the seat like kind of hangs behind the rear axle. I wonder, is there a amount of weight that you're carrying 16 kids, you get off the bike and then it just flops backwards? Is that me being crazy or?
No, no, that's 100% accurate. I almost paralyzed a couple kids when I got off. I started to get off,
Mhm.
and there was enough weight behind the axle that the front started lifting up, and I was like, "Oh shoot! All right, you guys get off first, and then
Right.
I'll get off." So, but that's only a problem when you've got kids standing on the back. Like when
Mhm.
everyone's in the seats, it's fine because they're basically centered over the axle, and then you've
Okay.
got all the front bike. But if you saw that storage compartment in the back, I had kids like standing in that and hanging off the back, and
Okay.
that's where you get into the issue.
Right. Yeah,
So if you don't abuse it.
something to think about. I do love this idea. I do also like. I'm a little concerned about the safety, not just what we talked about, the brakes and the rear axle, but also just generally speaking, driving a tricycle for especially for first timers is super different. Like turning is weird. You can't lean. Um, I would if I was in the market for something like this, I would take it very slow at the beginning and kind of maybe without passengers a little bit, because it's going to be uh, it's going to be a lot different than a typical bike experience.
Yeah. And that's a great point. Like I ride a lot of trikes, and so perhaps I'm a little cavalier about it, but that's absolutely correct that, like, it does feel a lot different. And in the beginning, each time you go into a turn, it's going to be kind of strange feeling, and it's definitely best not to start with passengers and to get more comfortable. Take those turns slower until it feels more second nature.
Yeah, there you go with a bunch of people on there. So base price is $3,000 before any extras. Is this available now? Where can I get it?
Yeah, it's already out. The company is 630. They've got a bunch of interesting trikes. Actually, a few weeks ago on the podcast, we were looking at their like tilting dual front wheel trike, if you remember. So they've got some interesting different trike models. This one's already available. Oh, I forgot to mention it does have UL certification. I just saw that there.
Okay.
So yeah, like another good thing. It's becoming a lot more common these days, but still a lot of bikes don't have it. So they have that. But yeah, so 29.99. That's technically the sale price. The MSRP is 49.99, though I don't recall seeing it at the MSRP very often. So for 3,000, I'm pretty bullish on it. I think it's just like a really cool way to drive kids around the neighborhood.
Yep.
Um, it takes up a lot more space than a typical long tail cargo bike, where you would also put 2 kids on the back, but it's just so much more relaxing. Like when I'm riding with kids on a normal cargo bike, you're balancing them. So like you have to always be thinking about that. And when you're moving slowly or stopping, like you really got to, be using like strong legs to keep everyone up there. But with this, you just roll along at like, 1 mile an hour, just laughing and not even like thinking about stability. So there's something to be said for trikes. I know that a lot of people like see trikes as like a weird thing, but I love them.
Yeah, and I can see a lot of uses not just for people moving, but also if you're hauling groceries, for instance, and you live in Florida, and there's not, whatever. I'm actually a little bit surprised that they went all the way up to class 2 20 mile per hour speeds. Like, again, like the safety of this thing has me a little bit, little side eyeing the whole thing because the brakes and the tricycle nature, the speed, the thing over the rear, a lot of weight behind the rear axle, all these things, like, you need to probably think about a lot. But I do also see like a lot of utility. You have that storage space at the bottom. You can put, this would be an amazing vehicle to, like, if say you're like 8 blocks from the beach, you want to take your family to the beach. Nothing better than this thing. I can't even imagine a better way to get to the beach.
Yeah,
Um,
and you put all the towels and the drinks in the storage area.
exactly. It's like, and you would just ride it right out into the sand and put it right next to your umbrella and towels and stuff.
Oh
Um,
man, yeah.
Totally get it. Like, it makes a ton of sense. I don't know why this is, we've had to wait this long for this thing, but on the other hand, there are some things to think about when you're riding this thing. Cool. I love it. So let's go to some of the questions here. I'll move that here. Randall's first. Goofy Smiley. JetCurrent looks neat. I hope they have a plan for a front basket or rack as a pint-sized, powerful commuter.
I think it
Obviously,
does. If I'm not mistaken, I think on the front of the head tube it had those bolts for mounting like a front
yeah,
rack.
yeah, and I think Juiced also has that in their accessory store. So you could probably put one together, at launch from Juiced, for an extra $100 or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, that would be cool. All right, Ray Living Good. I like the experiments you trial, Micah. Very informative. I like how eye-catching the rickshaw is, and the colors were a big swing, but it worked. What were we talking about, rickshaw? Which one is that?
The last one, the
Oh,
with the seat.
oh, wow, that just came in, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. Imagine door dashing potential with this thing if they made a custom carrier for the back.
You could do
That's an
like a
option.
party sub on that.
Yeah. If it costs less, I'd buy it just to toy around with. It reminds me of a chariot. Uh,
Yeah.
the rickshaw really got people going. How do you compare the value of the rickshaw in comparison with a cargo bike?
Yeah, so that's the thing. To me, it's a lot more fun. Also, it kind of depends what I'm using it for. So if it's, for kids specifically, I think I prefer the rickshaw for the stability and just like the vibe. But for pure cargo, I like the cargo bike better because I can go faster. Like it feels like a bike, it turns like a bike. As long as everything's strapped down, I can ride it, 28 miles an hour like a bike. So I think, yeah, if it's human cargo, I go rickshaw. If it's inert cargo, I go cargo bike.
All right, extra hero. People always say that trikes tend to tip over when turning, but did the rickshaw ever actually go anywhere close to tipping over? In future trikes, will have tip tests.
Yeah, so it definitely felt less tippy to me, and I think part of it's just because the rear was so wide and so heavy with that big, seat and rack and everything back there that it just didn't lift up very much. I could do it, but I had to really try, as opposed to some other trikes will just sort of will really lift up a wheel when you get to taking them on a too fast of a turn.
All right, with DoorDash, you could almost make $10 a day on that rickshaw. Hopefully, you can make more than that. I don't know if
I think that's a slight at DoorDash's pay
yeah,
value.
I think you covered that in a previous post. Hopefully,
Yeah.
making more than $10 a day. That would be, yeah, the least, hopefully. But that's it for the questions.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. I'm glad you all liked the rickshaw as much as I did. And we'll be back here in another 2 weeks for another episode of the Wheelie Podcast.